Well, as Chitu mentioned, Projek Keretapi is just one of the many projects that I work on. Like what he mentioned, I have many pets. One of the other pet is that I got a chance to go to Antarctica recently, and we've just managed to put together an exhibition. We literally just completed it last night, and that's at Balai Seni, but that's a whole other thing. So today we're here to talk about the railways, the Malaysian railways, right? And so before we start, I'd like to just show you a very small, short clip that sort of summarizes the spirit of the project itself. I'm so happy that I see a lot of very new faces, new friends, because I've given a few talks before, but all the Keretapi talks that I've given so far, they all touch on very different things. I think the first talk that I gave was in May, where I sort of introduced the project to the public. And then in July, I presented evidence on how the history of Malaysian railways really begins in Johor, with the Johor Wooden Railways and not the Taiping Portwell line, as we've all been so accustomed to in reading from history textbooks. And so on this talk, this will be the last Keretapi talk. And I'd like to focus this talk on oral history. I'll just show you this clip. Can you guys hear me? Can hear? I see a lot of nodding faces, so that's a good sign. Okay. Okay, so those images basically captures the spirit of the project quite well, I think. But before we start, there's one favor I'd like to ask. Don't look so glum, can? You guys look like you're in a classroom and you're waiting for the teacher to start today's lesson. But please believe me, like today, I don't want it to be very stressful like how it is now. I mean, look at this. The front row is completely empty. And this is a very Malaysian thing. You see it in classrooms as well. You know. Every student wants to sit right at the back because they can do all this hanky-panky stuff at the back and the teacher won't catch them, right? So I really be very thankful if you guys can come and fill up the seats in front. Thank you very much. So the name of the project itself is Projek Keretapi Kita. It's literally translated as Our Railways. And the aim of Projek Keretapi is really to document the history of our railways. And the first phase of this project is Postcards from the South. And Postcards from the South really focuses just on the southern line alone. Now, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I'm actually going to be talking about today. And I had a lot of time to think about it. And that's the danger with having a lot of time. You tend to think about something and then you revise it again and again and again. Until literally just 10 minutes ago, I was still writing down notes, revising it. And I might do the same as I'm going along, right? All documentary projects are an exercise in pursuing truth, mencari kebenaran. So we all go out there to find truth. And finding truth, this truth is something that can be found in many mediums. We find it in letters, in documents, we find it in maps, in photographs. we find it in film. And one of the mediums that I'm really fascinated in is oral history, so basically memories, and how we can extract these memories and use them as a primary source in understanding history. Now, when it comes to truth itself, I think there are two kinds of truth. There's an objective one and a subjective one, right? I know now it starts to sound like it's the beginning of a lesson, right? But bear with me, right? All you need to know about truth is really these two things, right? Objective and subjective. So objective is what you know. And what you know usually can be verified with facts, with written records. Like we all know how high a mountain is. We know how long a road is. We know when something happened, right? But subjective is what you feel. And some people would say that what you feel is not necessarily the truth, right? But it is a subjective truth. It is the truth for you. If you feel that you really like nasi lemak with ayam goreng rempah, and you think it's the greatest food, it's the greatest thing on the planet, it's the truth. It might not be the objective truth because you can't verify it, but it is the truth nonetheless, right? So I would like to show you an example of how we can use how we find objective truth when we try to document oral history, right? I'll just show this.
Yang Mulia Datuk Setia Pahlawan Meja Bersara Haji Muhammad Yaakob, Lembaga Suku Selamat.
Adik-beradik saya ni tak ada anak perempuan. Jadi kita ambil anak perempuan dua masuk waris saya lah. Bila masuk waris saya, jadi kita buat satu istiadat sebagaimana yang hari ni kita buat. Pertama saya diketua oleh Bopak yang tadi. Lepas tu yang atas lagi lembaga. Jadi dipertujuk oleh lembaga, jadi masuklah waris. Bila masuk waris, kita akan serahkan anak perempuan kepada suku waris yang perempuan tadi lah. Jadi dia terima. Bila terima sebelah suara, selesai.
Sebab pertama, kerana dia seorang dagang.
Can? Okay. Unfortunately, when I put this video into the slide, there's no way for me to scrub through it. But what I really wanted to show here is that this is a ritual that is in adat pepatih, right? And adat pepatih is very interesting because most of adat pepatih is not written down. And instead, adat pepatih is this set of principles and rules that exist in sayings, in pantun and all these kind of things that people will hand down from one generation to the next. So the only way for me to get a grasp of what is actually happening with this ritual is to get people to talk about it. And if you see, actually this interview is available online, you can see it online. But there is a ritual where members of a different clan, they would basically have this blood ritual. But anyway, this ritual no one has seen it for more than 80 years. So this is one of those rare times when they had this ritual. And so I thought this would be a very good example to show how the structure of an adat is captured and stored in stories. And without documenting these stories, you would have no access, no way to understand it. Now let me show you another example of a very subjective one.
Kasih kain angkat minyak tanah kah, minyak api kah, atau petrol, kasih kita lap ini semua, kasih lap lah ni semua. Ini lama yang modern bukan? Bila gambar jalan macam kita kasih buka. Dia buka, dia kena tu pak. Tu, bila wayang habis, ditutup. Sekarang sini sama Coliseum juga lama miang. Dulu Federal miang, dia orang semua suruh jual BC miang gede. Tengok berapa besar. Sana tengok. Ini flat. Ini flat tengok berapa panjang. Ini area. Ini scope. Ini cantik. Tahun 70, 71 tu zaman kita pergi tengok sekolah baca meja tiket dah 40 sen. Belakang 65 sen. Lepas hari Minggu kalau morning show 40 sen tiket jam. Belakang naik 80 sen. Sekarang sikit naik sampai sekarang tengok RM10, RM12, RM13, RM14. Sampai ini 2011 sampai ini gambar juga kita jalan film. Terus start kita balik digital. Sekarang apa gambar mau tengok ini 1, 2, 3. Ini gambar kita main kasih OK tekan. Dia tak ada layan. Motor letak kah, kereta hilang kah tak ada jaga. Tengok wayang juga. Banyak kereta sini. Dulu kita main time 3 show. 2,5, 5,5, 8,5. Apa sebab? 11.30 tu jam Sirjaya bas bukan. 11.30 lepas bas tak ada. Okey, lu duduk Sentol kah, Ipoh Road kah, Coliseum tengah wayang, lu berapa jam jalan kaki? Itu jam lu satu orang jalan kalau pun orang tak ada kacau. Orang pun tamat tanya, "Hey, sekarang lu mana pergi? Sekarang pukul berapa?" Tak ada. Sekarang lu berani gak lu jalan? Lu angkatlah the back, itu kamera lu angkat jalan lah. Ini komputer pun terang jalan lah, habis.
Okay, so that's an example of very subjective history. Because he didn't really present any really important facts, but he was really narrating his own experience. Now, a lot of historians, a lot of scholars like to look at objective facts, objective history, and say, this is what we should capture, this is what is important. Subjective ones are not important, right? But for me, maybe because I'm not a scholar, I'm not a historian, so for me, I'm more interested with the subjective. Because it gives us an idea of what things were like in the past. And it allows us to better understand, to better contextualize whatever it is that these people are really talking about. You know? It becomes so much easier for us to relate to it. And when we can relate to it, only then we can even begin to try to understand it. So, as I mentioned earlier, Postcards from the South is a documentation of the line between Gemas to JB, and that's why it's called Postcards from the South. There's also postcards from the north and from the east, but that's later on. The objective truth of the railways is aplenty. A lot of people have written about the railways. You will find many books, a lot of records about when the railways started, who did what when. But what we really don't have is what it was like to work or to live during those times. What was life like back then? So that is what Projek Keretapi wants to capture. I think I would just assume that all of you are familiar with the trains, right? Has anyone here has never been on a train before? So everyone has been on a train. Has everyone been on the Malaysian trains? Yes, KTM. Yes. Okay, so everyone has been. Awesome. So, and I meet a lot of people, and usually people who are really familiar with going on the trains, they will all tell me, I really like trains. I really love trains. But the moment you try to understand, try to quantify it, and ask yourself, why do I like trains? It's very hard to put your finger on it. It's very hard to find that one sentence of what is it about trains that you like? You know? And so I thought the best way to try to understand this is to go and speak to people. And so instead of having a preconceived idea of why people like trains, or why I like trains, or what trains mean to the people along the Southern Line, I decided to just abandon all of these ideas, go, travel, meet people, and see what they have to say, and look at their memories, right? So I'm going to bring you on a small tour of the Southern Line, right? This is the old Gemas station. They've already built a new station, but let me give you an overview, right? So this is Johor. And the Southern Line begins in Gemas, and it goes all the way through all of these stations. It crosses the causeway and it ends in Singapore. At least it used to end in Singapore, right? And this is what we did. As we traveled, we spoke to all of these people. We spoke to so many people in all of these small towns. And we realized how all of them, their memories, their experiences, are all interconnected. So it became very self-contained. And the most important thing, actually, with this animation that you just saw, is I did this animation myself. So please clap. Thank you. Okay, so we begin, not easy, huh? It's not easy, okay? So we begin in Gemas. So I'll show you all the station signboards, right? And I'm sure some of these places will be familiar to you. You've heard of it. You've been there before. And I'm sure there will be some places, some towns here, you've never heard before. In fact, a lot of these places, people are really unfamiliar, right? Because they're all in the interior of Johor. And the main road that cuts through Johor does not cut through these small towns. And if you take the highway, you bypass all of these towns almost completely, right? So in Gemas, we spoke to Madam T. Aisia, who runs the Bichu Hotel. Bichu Hotel is right behind the train station. I'm going to give you a small snippet of what she had to say.
I 小的时候2岁就没有妈妈了，我爸爸32岁就不做工了。他讲我们女孩子是泼出去的水，所以还要我嫁。15岁不了嘞，我不要就拿扫把拿拳头打，我怕，因为我是最小的，第7的，我哥哥姐姐也是无能为力，因为每个一看每个小，我爸爸很凶的嘞，很暴躁嘞。32岁就不做工，你有犯罪也好，没有犯罪啊都不管你，还要打麻将。7点出来，晚上12点才回去，我们生活很苦啊。
嫁过来他就已经有楼上这些房间了。
他是跟一个人公司，我家公和他的另外一个人，以前那人海南人就是朋友啊。他们没有钱没有本事，在这个卖饭有一点钱，以前买这个地才500块罢了嘛。早上起来那时要拿布从楼上拿到楼下，不是给你摸了，用厕所以前厕所大便都是白色，要用那个牙膏刷，刷到那个大便水都被可以看到，跪住来刷了。我家爸不给回啊，连扫墓都不给我去扫啊，嫁出去就是出来了，不给回啊，久回一次啊，很够力啊，那时很惨啊，早期，他就顾住他的车不要给我们用，也不要给我们回，我们就不要了，人穷是穷，我们要刮黑嘛。1975年结婚，1978年还生，他讲我一粒蛋都不会生，但我有了，他讲哎呀男的不要女儿，不要女儿，还以为是做那个狗要做盐的，就盐要做。以前啊，这个旧的火车站好，旁往很多人可以去坐一下，那种老人无家可归也可以在那边坐呀。现在坐那种新的，要坐火车才给人家进去，不好呀，坐到这样美不热闹。以前很热闹了，就马上就是个火车站。以前我孙我嘛，我的孩子全部都在火车站玩的，吃饱饭带我们去散步啊，现在没有地方玩了。他们每个孩子大了在新山发展，每个去咯，屋子空不租给人啦。现在剩下老人家罢了，每个马上在外面，这边有什么东西做一做。我的孩子才接手2年嘛，最近2年我来教给他做。现在上他做，我这个帮头帮尾，楼上全部就是我打理了。我要讲落叶都是要归根，你做到来也是做给人。
She speaks really fast. Is the mic on? That's, she speaks really fast. It's really hard to catch. But I think just by listening to her interview alone, you sort of get a feel of Gemas and how people feel about Gemas. And I have this collection of pictures. And if you go to Gemas, you meet all these people there, you will find that all of their holiday pictures are all taken at the railway station. Their albums are just full of these pictures, and it's like that was the most exciting place. Right? Another person that I interviewed is actually my mom. She grew up in Gemas, and I think this is the reason why I started documenting stories about the railways, is that I grew up listening to stories about the railways from my mom, and we grew up in Kuantan, and so I grew up wondering about this place called Gemas. I've never been there, I've never seen it. So I had to return, and I brought her back to Gemas, and we documented her story. And so we would continue doing that. Here's me speaking to Haji Jamil. He worked on the line in Kelantan, and he would tell us stories about the elephants and tigers and all that. I'll just quickly go through. Right after Gemas is Batu Anam. Has anyone been to Batu Anam? Oh, right, one person. Okay, so then we spoke to an uncle while he was cooking, 80 years old uncle who used to be a policeman, and then he didn't want to go and fight, or he didn't want to serve during the emergency, so he quit being a policeman. And then he won a lottery, and then he started his restaurant. So quite the life. And then we move on to Buloh Kasab. Buloh Kasab is an interesting station because it's no longer there. In fact, most people don't even remember it. And then we walked around, we were finding bits and pieces of Buloh Kasab. Funny enough, the only person who remembers Buloh Kasab station is this one guy who lives nearby. And so we found him, we spoke to him, and turns out, during the young days, he was a bodybuilder, and he served for 39 years in KTM. He is now, how old is he now? I think he's like 70, and he still has a gym at home. And he still works out. So then we go on to Cigar Man, right? And there's an interesting story with the Cigar Man because we interviewed many people in Cigar Man. I will get back to this later. And this is Haji Obid, and he lives in a kampong that is very near the station. It is so near the station. It's called Kampong Seberang Station, which literally translates to the village across the station. There's a lot of life that goes on in Cigar Man. Genuang. I'm sure no one has heard of Genuang before. No one has been to Genuang? Yes? No? Nope. Okay. So Genuang, we interviewed Manja. Yeah, his name is Manja. Like really, his name is Manja. And then we go on to Tenang. Tenang is also an abandoned station. They don't use it anymore. It's crumbling pieces. And then we go to Lobbies. And in Lobbies, we spoke to Mr. Chia, among many other people. This is the Lobbies station. Not many people would recognize it, but this is the new station, and this the waiting area here. It's the old station, the old Lobbies station. And along the way, we try to capture bits and pieces about life with the railways itself. And I love this next picture. I love this picture so much because everyone is having a tough time except the kid. He is clearly enjoying himself. And then from Lobbies, we go to a station that most people have forgotten about. Lenek Station. You can't even read the name anymore, but it's in the middle of the jungle. The only way to get to Lenek Station is to go through the Orang Asli estate or to follow the tracks, which is illegal. Right? So don't do it. Yeah? So with KTM, with the help of KTM, we got a trolley and then we went and visited the station. And the thing about, if we were to study just objective history, we would go and look at the station, maybe measure it, try to find the date of when it started and all that, right? But to really find out the story of what Lenek was back then, we had to travel all the way to Taiping. Because in Taiping, we managed to track down the very first station master of Lenek. And the beautiful thing about Mr. Tang is, he had passed on a long time ago. But the beauty of it is that he bothered to write down his memories. And he passed away in, I think, 2001. Was it 2001? Yeah, I think it was 2001. So I'm very grateful that he wrote everything down because this really is the power of writing down memories. You get to know what life was like back then in Lenek. And he writes about how he had to, while he was sleeping, he had to jump down from his bed because his house was being shot at by terrorists, by the communist terrorists. And there was no way for him to go out from Lenek and to go and get provisions. So he had to rely on his fellow railwaymen to pass him supplies. And so the train would pass by and they would just throw him, throw flour and whatever else that he needed. You know? So we go on to Bekok. Bekok is one of my favorite stations. If you have a chance, really you should really go to Bekok. It's a beautiful place. I have a lot of pictures, like beautiful pictures of Bekok to show, but there's not enough time, so you should go and see it. So in Bekok, we went and found old artifacts, things that left behind. This is actually a short clip, but should I show it? No, never mind. It's okay. Spooky? Spooky? Yes. I'll show it to you anyway. So that's Bukit Station, and that's the station master basically closing up operations for the day. When KTM starts the double tracking project, this station will be demolished, and so this would essentially be the last time you would ever see this. The line itself, the station, this way of working, because if you've been on the railways from KL, if you've taken the ETS to Ipoh, that's the electric train, and you will realize how different it is, right? How everything is so different, right? And also that was a test to see who would start fidgeting with their phones, while waiting for the train to arrive. This is in Palo. Have you heard of Palo? No? There's a Malaysian film called Palo. I think they shot it. Huh? Oh, someone stayed there before. Wow. Actually, where did you stay? Huh?
I stayed with Umar.
Oh, you. This one not fair. This is cheating.
Uncle was the station master here. I stayed for a few days.
So that means that would be my grand uncle. Yes. That's my uncle, by the way. Yeah. We met everyone in Palo. So this is a scene in the Palo Railway canteen. Will also be demolished. Sorry. We had the chance to meet a gate man. His name was Saron, and I'll show you a bit of what he had to say about his working life.
Saya orang kata cari makan sendiri. Tujuan baru umur 16 tahun tu. Itu pasal sekolah tak cukup pelajaran. Dah tak ada siapa nak tanggung. Lagi pada Lobbies, naik kereta api, tak tahu Palu dia pakai agak aja tu. Turun sini jumpa kawan. Bawa satu tikar buruk, batu bantal. Itu aku punya masa dulu tu. 1 tahun 631, 6 bulan jadul. 1,5 lah. Saya ada satu kali pergi Kuala Lumpur, pergi tubuh duka kan. Dia tak ada tulis pada papan hitam tu. Dia panggil satu orang masuk. Kawan tu pergi tengok pada papatan. Oh, baca ni. Lagi luar saya nampak benda cermin kan. Saya tengok. Kita hafal. Sampai orang tu habis giliran saya masuk. Saya baca. Ini mana awak kata darjah 1,5. Ini boleh baca. Tak apa, kita hafal lagi luar. Jemput sampai dia datang turun belon ke kawasan Moor tu. Turun 7 belon. Kita nampak malam tu. Turun bunyi. Waktu jam siren ada bunyi. Bagi sekenal tu orang lari ke menyeruk ke. Dia datang masuk kampung. Dia menganas. Kadang-kadang suruh orang tua panjat pokok kelapa. Orang tua mana boleh panjat pokok kelapa? Tak boleh naik, kau bagi turun. Dia bagi penendang ke, penampor ke. Komunis bergaduh pula dengan polis Jepun. Dia bertembak terus peluru bunyi ciung. Saya tu jam dekat kampung Tema ni ada macam 5 peluru bunyi. Saya menangis tau. Satu orang duduk dalam rumah menangis. Itu jam saya mari sini makan tepung hari-hari. Sampai rumah ketua saya tu satu sesen tanya, "Saron, apa pasal kau ni tak terdaya aja? Mana nak terdaya? Pagi makan tepung, malam petang makan tepung, tak ada kad memang tak boleh dapat beras." Kita buat makan roti tu sama buat sambal. Kadang-kadang kena berak darah pun ada. Pergi kerja tak boleh bawa air, macam air susu ke tak boleh bawa. Tak lebih daripada sebotol. Kalau habis tu dah 1 botol, minumlah air longkang.
Just for context, when he was talking about the beras and all that, he's talking about living under curfew. And so when they went out to work in the plantations, they couldn't carry anything with them except for like a bottle of water, and that's it. Because at that time there were such restrictions so that food supplies would not be handed over to the communists who were in the jungle. Yeah, so that's just a bit of context. Also, life in Palu. Chame, heard of Chame? Chame coffee? So we continued meeting people. I mean, that's the whole reason why I'm showing all these pictures, right? And it's interesting to see how in Chame, all that is left in Chame is basically residential houses, basically houses. You have the railway station, and it's surrounded by miles and miles and miles of plantation, of both coffee and rubber. And everything moves very, very slowly in Chame. If at all it moves. But suddenly, if you go to Kluang, if you continue going to Kluang, things move very quickly in Kluang. This is, if you've been to Kluang, you would know where this is. This is the main road that goes into town. Town is on the left, right? And this is called a level crossing, which means the train crosses on the road itself. And when the train comes, people in Kluang, especially people who live in railway towns, will be very familiar with the sound, ting dong, ting dong, ting. And that's when the barriers come down and all the cars have to wait, because the king of the road is passing through. So in Kluang also we met many interesting people, but I'll go through this very quickly, because I have a lot of pictures to show you, but I just don't know which one to show. Can anyone read that? Yes, this locomotive is called Temerloh. And I really liked how the locomotives back then, they all had a unique name. And so people who love trains and all these train spotters, they would wait at certain stations, they would wait at certain places, and they would wait for a particular train to pass. If it was Tun Lanang or Hang Kasturi, they would wait for it to pass, and then they would report it to their friends like, hey, Tun Lanang just crossed this kilometer at this time. This is the life, or it's like a subculture of train spotters. Really quite a fascinating routine actually for these people, and super dedicated, super committed. We go to Mengkibol. Mengkibol is also not in operations anymore, as you can see with the lalang all growing. And then to Sungai Sayong Halt, and here we interviewed my partner Faye's mother. She's on the left, and she narrated her life growing up in a new village, Sungai Sayong New Village. And then we go on to Renggam. Been to Renggam? No? It's okay if you've never been to all these places. I feel happy that I'm introducing these places to you. So now you know these places exist. Okay? This is in Renggam. It's still a wooden station. And then there's the Renggam Bus Company, the only means of transportation between Renggam and Kluang. Word has it that the bus company will be shutting down soon. Sad lah. So in Renggam, we managed to speak to a very interesting individual, Mando Gani. Mando Gani used to work on the tracks. So he would be the person with, he worked in the gang. So basically this group of people, the crew, the railway staff who worked on the gang, they were called, who worked on the tracks, they were called gangs. And so he was the Mando, meaning the person who supervised and tell other people what to do. Right? And so he was telling us stories about how things were during his time. And even until today, he's 70 plus, close to 80, and he can still remember ways of doing his job. And he can remember the measurement of all these railway sleepers and all. And he is convinced he can do a better job than the people who are working the railways now. Okay? So I'll just take his word for it. This is in Layang Layang. Very, very interesting name, Layang Layang. It's called Layang Layang after the birds, swallows that used to be in Layang Layang. Either that or people used to play kite there, but I don't know which is true. This picture is interesting. This is in Layang Layang. This is one of the earliest houses to be constructed in Layang Layang. And this is the original level of the road. So they've been tarring the road like so many times that it's now up to 1 meter high. Yeah, I just thought I'd show that. It's quite interesting. I hope you guys would have a chance to visit Layang-Layang. This is Master Talib. We interviewed him about how he used to work somewhere else, but he really wanted to come back to Layang-Layang. And then Sedana, which used to be a station, is no longer there. It's been demolished. The signboard is still there. And in Sedana, we interviewed 2 people who spoke at the same time. So this was really tough. And both of them were not really sure about what the other person is talking. So they're like, hey, are you sure? No, it was this, it was that. Not an easy interview. Husband and wife, yes. Ooh. Actually, to be fair, she had better points to share. He was just like going on and on. And then there's Kulai, Station Kulai. I don't know if you guys noticed, but if you look at the signboard, there's always the station that is after and the station that is before. It's there. Except for Gemas. Because Gemas is the railway junction, it's in the middle. So it's not indicated the signboard itself. This is how it looks like in Kulai. And in Kulai, we got to meet the people who are still now working on the tracks. Hard work under the hot sun. Senai Station, completely abandoned. Kempas Baru. It's called Kempas Baru, which means new Kempas, because the original Kempas was demolished. It was burned down and then demolished multiple times for reasons that are still unclear to me. Even by interviewing people, it happened so long ago that we were not able to really find any substantial records about what happened. But Kempas Baru is an interesting station because the design is completely different. It's the only cat-inspired station that we have. And I don't know why it has this Minangkabau design. I don't know. There we interviewed Pak Mat, who runs a one-seat barber shop. And then we skipped Tampoi, and we arrived in Johor Bahru. I'm sure everyone knows Johor Bahru, right? This is where Johor Bahru Station is, and look at all the development that's going around, that's happening around it. And over here on the left is JB Central, and that's where the train stops today. This is where the train used to stop back in the day. This is not an old photograph. In fact, it was just photographed last year. Many people look at black and white photographs and they think, oh, this is like in the 60s. No, it's not. And then we go on to Bukit Timah. This is the Bukit Timah station. The entire line between JB and Singapore has been decommissioned, has been removed. And now the Singapore government is converting it into a rail corridor. They're turning the whole place into a park, which I think is quite an interesting idea. So there we interviewed Atan. Everyone, he's like a star in Singapore because before they stopped operating the stations, a lot of Singaporeans just went there and they tried taking pictures with him, and they were all so excited because it was the last day of KTM in Singapore. And then there is Singapura. This is where the signboard is today, in the JB station, which is being converted into a railway museum. This is how Tanjung Pagar station, used to look like. The picture is a bit cropped, but yeah. So actually, this is, although I did most of this project, this entire project started in last year, started in 2016. This was not the first Keretapi interview. The first Keretapi interview actually I did in 2009, where I interviewed my granduncle. So he used to serve in the railways. And at that time, I didn't know what I was doing. But somehow I felt this desperate need to just record what he remembers. And honestly, I had no idea what I was even going to do with it. Yeah. And this is a picture of him with the trains. And the train that he worked on, the locomotive that he worked on as a technician, he was a loco cleaner. That locomotive is today parked in front of Museum Negara. So if you go to Museum Negara and you see this red colored locomotive, he used to work on that. Right? And so together with my mom, we interviewed him. And this whole project about documenting the railways became a bit more important when a few years after interviewing him, he passed away. And so suddenly, I felt as if I was the custodian of his memories. And not only that, I was the custodian of his very existence. Because I always remember this quote where people say, you in your whole lifetime, right, every person, you die twice. The first time is when you breathe your last breath. And the second time is when someone mentions your name for the last time. And so I thought, if I had documented his history, and if we can continue to remember him for his service, right, not because he's a great national hero or anything, but because he is related to me. He is part of my history. It's my own journey in trying to find my identity in the railways as an Indian in Malaysia. And one of the challenges with documenting oral history is actually trying to make sense of interviews. I think Malaysians are very interesting in the way that they speak, because 50% of their interviews is basically this, sign languages. So what happens is that sometimes you record an interview and it's amazing. You meet this amazing person, amazing story, and then you bring the interview back, you sit down in front of a computer, you listen to it, and you have no idea what the person is talking about. And then you wonder, like, how is it possible? Like, this was very interesting. Why does it feel so flat? It lacks any life. And that's when I realized that the problem with oral history is sometimes translation across mediums. I'd like to think of interviews that we do, right? Whenever we take a chair and sit in front of a person and we speak, what happens is a performance. It's a performance that has an introduction, it has a beginning. And that beginning is usually me trying to explain the project to the person. And then once they accept the project, they make a commitment to it. They start opening up. And they start talking about their entire lives. Like, imagine this. Imagine how ridiculous this situation is, right? Imagine you are a person who is in Palo. You've been working there for maybe 40, you've been living there for 60 years. You've been doing the same thing. All of a sudden, one day, someone comes along with a camera and tells you, can you tell me your whole story of your life? Think for a moment how ridiculous that is. Yeah. But I'm so fortunate, I'm so honored that most of the people that we approach, they gladly accepted us. And we all sat down and we spoke for an hour and sometimes 2 hours. And they shared everything about their lives. And sometimes things that they don't even share to their own partners, their own family, they would share with us. So it's very privileged. But therein lies the challenge on taking all of this, transcribing it, translating it, and then making sense of it in a way that we can all read it. These are two very different mediums. And the best way, I think, to understand this is the difference between listening to a song and reading the lyrics. Essentially, the body of it is the same, but the medium is completely different. And if you sit and read the lyrics of a song, you'll be like, oh man, this is horrible. Because a huge chunk of it is taken away, it's stripped away out of context. And that's what happens with interviews. So what we do with the interviews is that we transcribe it. Right? So this is an example of what a transcribed interview would look like. Questions, answers, questions, answers. And we try our very best to edit it for clarity and to put it all together in a way that someone can sit down, read it, understand it, not only today, but in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time. Because this is a permanent record of the memories of all these people. I know there's a lot of red squiggly lines, but it's not mistakes. It's just the computer not understanding English and Malay at the same time. Okay? But I have to say that I would like to give an example of how an institution can come on board and do great work with oral history. And the example that we use is the National Archives of Singapore. They've paid so much attention to oral history, the documentation of it, and most importantly, the processing and making it accessible. And that's something that we find very challenging to do here. So if you go to the Singapore Archives website, we have these quotes, and then what are you looking for? All words, any words, exact phrase. You can type in something that you're looking for, and it will tell you if they have a reel where someone mentioned this. So you can type Malayan emergency, and it would give you a list of people who talks about the Malayan emergency, or in this case, new citizens in Singapore. And then you can go even deeper, and if you type something like family, it will tell you the exact time code of where this person mentions the word family. This is incredible. And sadly, we have not done anything like this in Malaysia. Even if you look at the collection, the records of the oral history in the National Archives, it remains just as recordings. And if you try to access it, it would just tell you this person, we interviewed this person at this date. It doesn't tell you what is in there. So then you would have to spend an hour just listening to it and then realize, oh, this is the wrong tape. And what about universities? So some universities have collections as well. As far as I know, the biggest ones will be in UTM and UKM. I've visited the UKM archive, and the UKM archive is basically these interviews printed out, stored on shelves. And that also makes it very challenging to access. So Singapore Archives has done a fantastic job, and I really hope that museums and institutions in Malaysia can take this model. Even if you want to steal this model from Singapore, by all means, just do it. As long as we have it. Jangan malu sangat. And remember how I told you that it's hard to translate across mediums? And that happened with one of the interviews that we did with Haji Obid in Cigar Man. When we met him, actually there was no planned appointment or anything. We were just walking around Kampong Seberang station, and then we came across, he was just seated there in his sarung, topless, he was just seated there. And then we asked him, like, do you remember the story of this kampong? He's like, yeah, I remember this, I remember that. And then we said, we would like to interview you. And then he said, just one moment. And then he walked away, and then he came back wearing pants, nice batik shirt, and his brill cream in his hair. He looked really, really smart. And so we sat, and he spoke about traveling on the trains. He spoke about steam engines and all these things. But sadly, once we got back, listened to the interview, we could not transcribe it. We just could not understand it. And so we had to remove it. But that happens. That happens when we translate across mediums. The other interesting interview is in a place called Neo, where I interviewed Mr. Subramaniam. Neo is a very, very quiet town. It's just before reaching Kluang. And his barber shop was the only shop open on that whole street. So naturally I went and interviewed him. And this is the beautiful thing about these interviews. Right? When you go into a town, you're observing everything about the town. Where the main road is, where the buildings are, where the railway station is, everything. But the moment you find that one person that you like to speak to, everything zeroes in on that one person. And the moment you get that commitment from that person, you sit down and you have that conversation, nothing else matters except you and him, or you and her. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing. And at that moment, you don't care about Facebook notification, what's happening on WhatsApp and all these things. You can't, because it disrupts the whole thing. And there is a rhythm when it comes to speaking to people. And as a listener, we have to match that rhythm. And once you're in sync with that person, oh, it's a beautiful moment. You can go on and on, talking and talking. And so in this case, while we're speaking to Mr. Subramaniam, the only way to get in sync with him was to understand what is it that he was doing, his daily, his profession. Right? So I sat down with him, and I got a shave with him, and while he was shaving, we did the interview. We got quite a good story. And I had to be very careful about the questions that I was asking him. You know. And I think this is one of the, I think the main important point that I would like to make today. We have already come to a point, I was just speaking to my friend Cheryl earlier about how people don't pay attention anymore. We've sort of come to accept the fact that people don't read anymore. And I think that's very sad. But even more worrying is that we have sort of lost this ability to just have a deep conversation with another person. We have this touch and go type meeting. Hey, how are you? I'd like to catch up with you, yada, 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 yada. And usually in these conversations, it's just a chance for you to tell your story. Hopefully someone will listen. And then you listen to the other person's story just enough time so that you can continue with your own story. And I think this is something that we need to address. Mainly because with social media today, what's happening today is that we are only reading and listening to material that we like, that we agree with. It's essentially an echo chamber where you're only surrounded by things that agrees with you, that agrees with your worldview. But in order for us to be better human beings, I think, we need to surround ourselves with things that we might disagree with, challenge ourselves. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is to go out there, to travel within the country, speak to fellow Malaysians, and speak very wholeheartedly. Not because you're out there to get something, but just go out there and try to connect with other people. And I think for a lot of people, if going out there and meeting people, you don't even have to record their oral history or anything, just talk to people, right? And if that is tough, I would really recommend that we start with the people who are closest to us. That is super, super important. And I'll end this presentation with a small note on that. Many years ago, I started making films. Right? And I always remember there was this one time when I was shooting a short film in my home in Kuantan. So what I was doing is I was recording birds. So I would set up the camera, and that time we were still using tape, DV tape. Right? I would set up the camera, and I would record birds that were flying around the house. Looking back now, I wonder what a stupid thing to do. But at that time, I was putting together a short film, and there was this one moment in my backyard when my father opened the back door. He came out, and then he asked me, "Are you still shooting?" And then I just looked at him and I said, "I'm shooting." And then he's like, "Oh, okay. And then he walked away. I've spent my entire career recording stories of people, complete strangers. I've spent about 10 years doing this across the country. And it pains me to think that I never sat down and recorded the oral history of my own father. I asked him to talk about his life, but he always said that it was very painful. And sometimes I think about that, and I wonder whether I should have been more persistent. And sometimes, even until today, I would think back at that tape that was rolling at that time. And I would ask myself, what if, just if, his voice was also caught on that tape? Because every day, I sometimes would sit and think, I'm starting to forget how my father sounded. Starting to forget his voice. If only I had turned the camera the other way, if only I had bothered to sit down next to him and record it, then maybe today I could actually listen to his voice. So I'm glad I got the time to record my mother's memories and my granduncle and all of these people who live along the southern line. I don't know most of them, but all their memories are now with me. I keep them. So don't make the same mistake that I did. I think there is very real value in recording voices and memories. And it really doesn't have to be about a historical event It doesn't have to be about Malayan emergency or anything serious like that. Sometimes it can be just about nothing at all. You know? And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mahen. Right now, we'd just like to move on to a quick Q&A session.
Yay.
Perhaps, Mahen, take a seat.
Yes.
Yeah, a bit less. Actually, I just want to ask a question myself first. You've recorded a ton of material for this project, and what was not very apparent to me in the talk was what do you actually plan to do with all this material? Yeah, I mean, if there's some sort of output or like...
I think perhaps I forgot to mention it. Well, all of these recordings that we've made and all these transcripts of these interviews will be published in a book. The book will be called Postcards from the South, and it will be a complete documentation of the entire Southern Railway. And that book will be published by November.
And how far into the progress of this book? Have you given me deadlines?
Yes, I've got deadlines, and the deadline has been shifting, keeps shifting, precisely for the reason that I mentioned earlier. When I started the project, I thought, "Alah, very easy, like how many stations do we have? 16, that's it." But then, for every station, we spoke to about 3 to 5 people, and then so we have 3 to 5 interviews, and then when you translate it, you get double that amount. Suddenly, it became this task that is so laborious task, and it's so time-consuming. Oh, God, it's so time-consuming. But I'm really glad that I did it, and I hopefully, after putting all this effort, even more effort to get it done, it will be something that I can look back and be happy with, and I think it will be something that can serve as a permanent record in Malaysian history.
Okay, I'm going to ask this in regards to the materials. I'm guilty of the same thing, because every time I make a film, I end up with like 20 hours of footage, of interview footage actually, that probably only end up like 30 minutes of it ever being used in the film. And I always tell myself like, oh, like it'll be great, like let's set up this archive where all this raw and unedited footage is made available, transcripts made available to the public and all, but of course I've never done so. I'm just wondering if there's a platform awaiting all this material that's going to be in existing now for everyone to access.
I think that's a very good point, because I also talked about accessibility. And one of the ideas that we had for Projek Keretapi is to set up an oral history archive where all of these interviews would be made available. And I think it's as simple as simply having just one computer, headphones, and all of these interviews in a folder, organized somewhat, right? And people will be able to sit down and listen to these interviews. And once these transcripts are done, we could have files, we'll put it in files. But I think the way to go would be to adopt like the model that Singapore archives have. And I think if we can create a railway archive, that one point, like a resource center, that collects all of this information about the railways, because I know that a lot of people are interested in the railways, they're all fascinated by it, and everyone takes it upon himself or herself to go out there and research about the railways. And what happens is that we have pockets of documents, pockets of material all over the country. And the grand plan would be to collect all of this material in one place, so that it becomes a regional thing. When we start to study about Southeast Asian railway history, then we can share this history with countries like Thailand, countries like Vietnam, because we fail to remember that we are physically connected to these countries by the railways. And so I think that's really the grand plan. We will definitely need institutional support to get that to get it off the ground. So hopefully that happens. Hopefully.
All right. I'm just going to open up the floor to questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and we'll pass you a mic. All right. Sure. Hang on. A mic's coming to you. Hang on. Oh, we went to the back first. Sorry.
Brilliant. Okay, it's brilliant. It makes me cry. I come
Thanks,
from a
Ariel.
place where trains are part of our national identity, and we all know why we love trains. So it was very interesting because I'm thinking of, in the end, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to ask him why people love trains. And you start off by saying, well, you know, it's really hard to figure out why people love trains. So, but I'm sticking to the question. Like, after being out there and being on the lines and being in these towns with this, where the train station is the heart, was the heart of the community, maybe still is the heart of the community. The train track is still that connector to other communities, and it is the thing that bonds the community together. So what, after being out there, what do you think people love about trains? Right.
I think we can look at the idea of loving trains in so many aspects. One of it is a very practical reason, logistics. So for a lot of people who live in these small towns, the trains and the railways were the only means of transportation to the outside world or to larger towns. On a more nostalgic point of view would be the fact that the trains or the railways in Malaysia is so old. And it is many people forget, I think, or we don't realize that the railways is the oldest living heritage that we have. We have a lot of old buildings, and they were all constructed by the British while they were here. But these buildings would go on to serve different functions over its lifetime. They get renovated slowly a long time, you know. They serve different functions. For example, Sultan Abdul Samad building. You know. But the railways have always served this same function from the time it was first constructed. If you look at the Selangor State Railway when it was constructed 1885 until today, it still serves the same purpose. And it's the oldest living heritage. And I think we all look back at the railways as a sort of a reminder of the narrative of the country itself. Because I feel that whenever we talk about something, whenever we talk about our own history, a personal history, we always fall back on something. And so for families who have a long history of, let's say, your family were all carpenters for 4 generations, that's something, heritage that you lean back on. And for some people, they have a culture that they've been practicing for a very long time. Your identity is basically defined, not entirely, but in large part by this. And for many communities, all these places that I've mentioned before, their existence relies on the railways. And you can't take Palo railway station out of Palo. Palo would just cease to function. And I think there was this quote that I came across, which basically says that one of the reasons why we love traveling on trains so much is that train rides are both a private space and a public space at the same time. And it's the only mode of transportation where that happens. If you go on a bus, you're basically limited to just this, right? Your seat. If you get up and walk around in the bus, people are going to look at you really weird. But you can do that on a train. You can stretch, you can walk around, you can go to the next coach. Just don't try to go to the driver's coach, that's all, and don't go to the back. You know? And I think we as human beings, we function better in environments like this. It allows us to explore, and we don't feel this constant need of wanting to run away. You know, when you sit in a seat, especially in your economy seat on an airplane, you just feel like, oh my God, let this ride end. You know, I want to reach my destination quickly. But for a lot of people who love being on trains, you would agree with me that the train journey itself is the destination sometimes. I know a lot of crazy people who buy train tickets just to be on a train. And it doesn't matter where they end up. Because once they reach the terminus, they would just take another ticket and come back. But all they really want is to just be on that train, to look at the scenery outside as it moves along, and to meet all these different people. I think there's a sense of adventure in that. And I think we've sort of lost that with the ETS. The train moves at 140, you can't put your head out of the train. Don't try. I think that should answer it. There's more, but then I will go on and on.
And of course, being able to take a piss in the toilet anytime you want to in a train. That's very important, I think. Next question you have? Yeah.
I was just wondering if you have an idea how to integrate or complement oral history and objective history in curriculum today, and be it in schools, university, because from your presentation we see the importance of oral history from a different perspective. And do you have an idea, or even do you have any plans to do that? Or else it probably would just stay somewhere in an archive and not being used.
I think these methods in oral history has a place in schools, in the curriculum. Even at a very young age, students can already be encouraged to go out there and document it. And I think I was just having a conversation like this with a friend about heroes. And there was this ongoing debate about how we should include all of these heroes in our textbook. And then there was another group that was saying, why only include these heroes? Like, there are so many other people that I could also classify as heroes. And how do you define a hero? Is it a person who served in a political party, or a person who killed many people? How do you define it? And I think, and my response to that was that it was more important for us to educate children to be able to identify acts of heroism, and maybe give them assignments to go and document your own stories, to start with your own family. And I think it will be a beautiful thing if we encourage maybe kids in Standard 3 or Standard 5 to write about their grandmother, their grandfather. And I think there are efforts like this in schools. So I think there is a space for young students today to pursue this path. The challenge is that there is no follow-up, like what I mentioned. Once they go to secondary school, it sort of just gradually disappears. And then once they go to university, it becomes this elective course that no one wants to take because it's very time-consuming. And many people find this idea of going out there, having a conversation with someone as something very boring. And sometimes people are afraid. I've spent a bit of time at the UKM archive, and I will look through this, look through the transcripts. And there is the unedited and the edited version. So I'll always look at the unedited. And it boils down, I think, to this art of asking questions. We don't ask a lot of questions in school. In school, we always avoid the front row, and then we sit behind, and we don't ask questions because we are afraid of the teacher. The teacher would ask the question, and then we would all hide and make no eye contact with the teacher. So I think we grew up thinking that we should always avoid asking questions. And so I've noticed from these records that these students, mind you, university students, can't really ask good questions. Sometimes they would go and ask like an old man, okay, Pakcik, boleh cerita tak? Can you tell a story? And they would be like, nak cerita apa? What do you want me to say? So I think that's very important, asking questions. I think we should start there. Malaysians should ask better questions. Yeah. I hope that answers the question somehow.
Do you have any more questions? I mean, since Mahen just made a call that we all should ask more questions.
Oops.
All right.
What are you doing about language? Like, some of the interviews are in...
Oh yes, language. This book is very Malaysian. So whatever language that the interviewees originally spoke in, that will be retained. And so what we're doing with this project is that if a person speaks in Chinese, we would translate it to English. If a person speaks in Malay, we are not translating it. I feel that everyone understands Malay, all Malaysians understand Malay. And I hope that readers would be able to flip through the book and not just see transcripts, but have a sense that we've really put a lot of effort to capture the essence of these people. And so in the course of editing these interviews, we've retained a lot of the flaws that a lot of people would have removed out of interviews. Sometimes when people mention or they are not sure about something and some mistakes that they make with words, we keep that in. My benchmark is very simple. For me, I'm answerable not to the people who are going to buy the book, but the people that I've interviewed. My greatest pleasure would be when a person that I've interviewed looks at their own interview and feels that they are there within the book. And that's the question that I always ask myself. What would this person say? And if I can achieve that with the book, then I think I've done justice to the interview. And I think people would sense this sense of character within the book itself. I don't want it to be something that's very sterile or uniform, because you go out there and you meet all these people, the last thing on your mind is how similar all these people are. They're all so different. And it defies all acts of simplification or generalization that we have. And the moment someone in the city says, oh, all these kampung folks, they're very simple folks. Not really, no. Everyone is different. Yeah. And I hope the book and this project celebrates that. It's a book that is not so much about railways as it is about people around the railways. It's a book of people. Yeah.
Hang on.
Hi, I have more of a technical question. I think your photos are beautiful. Do you shoot in film or in digital?
Both. Sometimes while I'm interviewing people, I usually shoot on digital, mainly because it's easier. And but a lot of the photographs that I've shown, especially the black and white ones, were all shot on film, mainly because of this, the tangibility and longevity of film. When we shoot on negative film, it's rated to last for about 100 years. And so I keep that in mind while I'm shooting, and I would like the material that I photograph, the material that I collect here, to stand the test of time. So perhaps in that way I'm making a statement by photographing the stations and the signboards on film. And by photographing people on digital, it's also sort of a statement that people are not permanent. People will go away. People will die, and their stories will die with them. So to answer that question, both. And I do think a lot about the medium that I would use whenever I'm photographing something. There's a lot of consideration that goes into it. Yeah. They've been exhibited before when I had the talk at Ruang. I will be exhibiting some pictures because Projek Keretapi will also be part of the KL Biennale at the National Art Gallery. So I will have a selection of pictures there as well. But there are plans for a larger exhibition. Yeah, definitely, yes. Oh, here comes the hard one.
Yes, you're right. Great talk, Mahen.
Thank you.
I'm interested in your process and how time becomes a factor, because I feel like the urgency of it began with interviewing your granduncle and the time left that you had with him, and now also the time left to document places before they're demolished. But I also know it's a really hard project, and you work on multiple projects. Some of them are more short-term, long-term, years. Some are months. how do you keep going through the process, given that it's so many hours of transcription and editing and all of that?
I'll be honest, sometimes it's very hard to justify it. Sometimes you look at yourself and the bulk of work that you have, and you ask yourself whether it's worth it. Because no one is asking you to do this. And it's very easy to say yes to commercial projects because at the end of it, you're going to get paid for it. But there is this call within that says you have to do it. And if you don't do it, no one else will do it. And would you be happy not doing it? And suddenly you see that you don't really have a choice. And some people would attribute it to a higher calling. Maybe God gave it to me and told me to do it. It's an assignment from above. And I can't say no. But I like to think that it's my own personal commitment to it. And you're right, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time for research. It takes a lot of time to figure your way through. When it comes to oral history, the easy part is finding the stations. The hard part is finding the people to speak to. And it's also trying to balance it out because you can't just have interviews with railway staff. You can't just have interviews with people who live around the stations. But that is something that for me, the process has been very instinctive. There have been many situations where I would go into a place without any research at all. And what I would do is I would go to a place, let's say Palo or Bekok, and I would spend many hours or maybe days just observing. You try to get a pulse of this place. And you try to observe the people and see what is it that they're doing. What do the people here occupy their time with? What's happening here? What are the people worried about? What are they talking about? You overhear conversations in kopitiams. Like for example, when I was in Bekok, a lot of people travel to Bekok. It's a charming little town, a lot of flowers around, wooden houses. It's very charming. And people love to go around, take pictures with Instagram and all. And when I first arrived in Bekok, that's what I thought as well. I went around, like, oh wow, very nice. I love this place, so nice. I want to pack up and get a place here and live here. But then I started speaking to the people, and I realized how there is a darker side to Bekok. This realization came to me when, during this one night when the whole team was there, after a whole day of interviewing people, we wanted to just go and have a drink, have a few bottles of beer. So we went to an old kopitiam, we sat down, and then we ordered beer. And then they said, oh, we only have warm beer. And we thought, how odd. Then we realized that the fridge was not switched on because electricity was expensive. And then so we settled for warm beer. And then we looked around at all these tables, right? You know how here in KL, you're used to seeing many tables full with Chinese old men sitting around drinking beer. And there, in the middle of the night, 8 p.m., they were drinking tea. And we thought, how odd. And so we asked, like, uncle, like, why are they all drinking tea? You know, is the tea very nice? And the uncle just said, no, because they can't afford it. They can't afford beer. And I felt so guilty holding that bottle. Oh my God, I'm drinking beer. And that gave me an understanding that, I see, these are all people who are working in the plantations. And there are no young people in Bekok because all the young people have left. They've all gone on to Singapore and to KL. And so I think these are the kinds of things that you only discover when you allow yourself to be immersed in that space. And not have this parachute attitude that a lot of documentary projects are. Unfortunately, they are forced to do so because of constraint in resources. So they only have one day. Go in, shoot, get out. You know, so even if they don't find the right person to shoot, you have to find someone to shoot. The producer is there saying you have to do it today. So in that sense, I would say that we had sort of a luxury, but we also had that constraint of time. Because we were spending a lot of time to travel through the interiors, and it took a lot of time to go to these places like, let's say, Bekok, and then come back to KL or go down to JB. So this traveling took up a lot of time.
As we're running out of time, I can take one more question. Is there anyone with one last burning question?
Why is it burning?
I don't know. It has to be burning you. Right, okay. Hang on.
You mentioned about putting everything that you have collected in a resource center, and I think you had a lot of help from KTM.
Sorry?
You had a lot of help from KTM in accessing all these places. So are they interested in something like this, like opening up a museum, a real museum, or resource center?
Yes. They are very much interested in doing it. So KTM has a Jabatan Museum within KTM itself. There are only like 1 or 2 people, actually 3 people in the Jabatan Museum. And there are plans to convert the old JB station into a railway museum. But I think the challenge is always the funds to do it. And also, through my conversations with them, I think we need to rethink the idea of a museum. Because just having a building, an empty building with lights and having artifacts there alone does not constitute a museum, especially in this day and age where the function of a museum has gone beyond just preserving, conserving items, artifacts, but also providing a platform for consumption of history. And that's incredibly, incredibly important. But I think there isn't a support system in place yet. But the good news is that KTM is always open to working with other parties like ourselves, like Projek Keretapi. So I think that shows a commitment on their part as well. And I've been very grateful that KTM has supported the project by providing access. So someone from Jabatan Museum, from the museum department of KTM would come along on our trips, some trips. And that allows us to photograph the interior of abandoned stations, to photograph inside the trains, to sometimes go into stations and open up a safe and let's see what's inside. You know, this box has not been opened for 40 years, let's find out. So that's all very exciting, and I'm very grateful for that. This project would have been only half as exciting if it wasn't for KTM. And I think there's an opportunity for all of us to also do our part. Yeah, we can also go out there and try to also come up with new ideas, new ways of doing things. And I think a lot of institutions, even government institutions, are quite open to working with the members of the public. Yeah, I think that.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to ask one last question. Yeah, I know. I mean, because of course the recent confirmation of the ECRL basically is like, you know, finding you in a coffin, and the only
coffin.
It's sort of a coffin, no? I mean, the only thing we have left now that's a sort of a railway track is the Gemas Tumpat line, and that's got to be, I pretty much think, decommissioned once the ECRL comes in. How do you feel about this actually? I mean, train travel as it is will never be the same again. Yeah.
I think we can look at it 2 ways. One is that the railways is changing, and it's always changing. Has been changing for the last 100 years. And right now is actually a very interesting time to look at the railways, because the 3 branches of these lines, actually 4 if you count in Sabah State Railway, they all exist at different stages. Gemas is right in the middle. It's the junction. So if you look at the northern line, which is from Gemas to Padang Besar, it's double tracked, fully electrified, electric trains all the way, new stations, everything is brand new. Trains are going at 140. If you look at Gemas to JB, it is still the old single track, but this will change within this year or the next year, where it will be converted into a double track, and all of these stations that I've just shown you will be demolished. And the other line that you're mentioning is the East Coast line. The East Coast line is particularly interesting. So as my friend Ling mentioned earlier, there was a sense of urgency in documenting the Southern line. So at first we were like, okay lah, still got time. And then suddenly we got news that the double track is going to start, and we said we have to do it now, right now. And that feeling of urgency is now happening with the East Coast line. So this line runs between Gemas to Tumpat, cuts through the interior. In the past, the British were not interested in going the coastal route to connect to Kuantan on the coast and then go all the way up to Tumpat, because the British thought that they will not get their return of investment from that venture. So they went through the interiors because there was gold in the interior. Now that is changing with China. China is coming in and China says, we want to bypass Singapore. So we want cargo to go from Klang, to cut across the peninsula, go all the way to Kuantan and to Tumpat, and then transfer it onto ship and go to China. So that will technically make it faster. And this is happening. The construction of this line has already started. We don't know whether this line will be successful or not. There are not that many people traveling, but it doesn't matter because the main aim is cargo. The East Coast line from Gemas to Tumpat, which I mentioned, is already making a loss right now. Every month, KTM loses tens of thousands of ringgit just to keep this line alive, because it is the only way for people in the interior to travel to places like Tumpat and Gua Musang to go to school. So the story of the East Coast Railway is very, very different. And if you go on these trains, especially the shuttle trains, you get to see farmers carrying all their produce. They're going to the market. You get to see like a hunter, carrying rifles, and he would get down in the middle of nowhere and go into the jungle. And then you see students going to school. And I hope to document all of this before they disappear. So once I'm done with this book, I will go on and do that. But there is also always the case of finding funding for it and finding time for it. And there is always that challenge. But I think also the other side of looking at it is we cannot be afraid of development. Because while we in the city might look at development and say, oh no, sayangnya, all these old stations are being demolished. If you ask the people who are living in these places, they are more than welcome. They more than welcome development. For them, it's finally the electric trains are coming to our place. So we can travel to Singapore faster. Our children can come back home more often. Connectivity would be better. We welcome it. So I think it's about striking a balance between appreciating and preserving heritage and history, but also not running away from embracing modernity. That's a very tricky line to straddle, and I think so far we've not done a very good job at it, because we tend to demolish everything and only keep the ones that are popular. We will keep Kluang Station, we will keep Segamat Station, we will keep Kluang Station because there's a famous railway coffee. We keep Segamat Station because there is a famous nasi lemak there. Taiping Station will remain because everyone loves Taiping Station. But all the other stations are demolished. I don't know. Tricky. I wish that there was a way to keep all of these stations because they hold so much memory, and it is the one thing that binds different generations together. It is the one thing that an 80-year-old person can relate to with a 15-year-old, a young person. They can both look at the railway station and be talking about the same thing. And they couldn't be more further apart in terms of experience in life. Whether it's using the internet or telephone or email and all these things, but they can all look back at the train station and say, yes, that is history.
Thank you very much for this extremely poignant and enlightening talk.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it is actually. I'm a train geek myself.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mahen.